So you now had a chance to get to know your neighbor. We're optimistic that we can now connect Andreas with his slides. So you don't need your headphones for the moment. Take two. Can I invite you to put your hands together with anticipation and welcome Andreas Schleicher.
Thank you. We just wanted to give you a sense of what it means to be in a classroom, to teach creativity and doing things that are out of the box. No? I mean, and just to sort of, by way of context, of course, our education systems that we have today have created many wonderful things. I would say probably almost everything that you see around you is a product of education. The fact that we sit here in this room, the technology around us, the social environment, all of that is the fruit of education and culture. But that same education also has left us with a number of real disconnects. Now, the disconnect between that infinite growth imperative and the very finite resources of our planet. The disconnect between the financial economy and the real economy. The disconnect between the wealthy and the poor, or geography, social background, gender, all those disparities that we see. The disconnect between what we call our gross domestic product, how we measure progress, and the sense of well-being of people, between what is technologically possible and the social needs of people, between the way we run our systems and the at least perceived voicelessness of people. And that is the other part of the equation. If we want to see a different world, we probably have to think about a different education system. And then, in the middle, we get struck by a pandemic that has fundamentally disrupted, not our way of working in education, but also our thinking about education. I think the kind of broadcasting approach to education suddenly broke down. And now you get many young people going back to their teachers saying, well, during the pandemic, I figured out, actually, there are so many more interesting resources around us than what I learned in school. Why can't we do things differently in our schools? Now you can see many teachers going back to their principals and say, well, during the pandemic, I understood it's not enough to just be a great instructor, but you have to really become a great coach, a great mentor, a great facilitator, a great evaluator, a great designer of innovative learning environments. That's the only way how you reach your student. And you can see many school leaders going back to the local administration saying, well, during the pandemic, you really left us badly alone, but we figured things out, and now don't take that space away from us. So I actually think this pandemic has, induced an enormous amount of creativity, of social innovation, of technological innovation, next to the hardship that it caused for those who were not prepared. The other side of the equation, that this pandemic has just massively amplified almost any form of inequality in education. And it's clear that the future is always going to surprise us. Climate change is going to disrupt our lives a lot more than this pandemic. And artificial intelligence, is going to put to the test a lot of what we do in education now. We know how to educate second-class robots, people who are very good at repeating what you tell them. But what's going to make you human in a world in which the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have become easy to digitize, to automate, to outsource? These things are disappearing from our economies, our labor markets. We have that toxic mix of young people completing a university degree and having difficulties finding a great job, and at the same time, employers telling you, I cannot find the people with the skills I need. That's the reality. And then you can see lots of other, trends shaping the future of our economies and surely also the future of our education systems. Some are going to change us more, have a greater impact. Some, come with great uncertainty. We do not know that mix, and we cannot predict the world of tomorrow. We don't even know what's going to happen in the next 3 hours. But I think we should think harder about the kind of futures that we might see and the trends that influence and shape those different versions of the future. And the more agile we become in imagining different futures, the better we will be prepared for the future that eventually arrives. And that is creativity deployed not just in the classroom, but deployed to our education systems. Thinking more creatively about alternative versions of the future to be better prepared. That's really my main message to you. If you look at the economies, you can see how, the companies that are successful these days are companies that are involved with the intangibles. The future economy is an economy of the intangibles. Yeah, it's, called technology, but technology is just the mediator here. The point is, whoever deals with knowledge, with the, creation of knowledge, the mobilization of knowledge, the sharing of knowledge is incredibly successful today because you can scale knowledge infinite. Very different from traditional physical products. And you can see sort of the traditional Fortune 500 success stories. They still exist, but they're no longer the game changers, the drivers of tomorrow's economy. So again, the future economy, an economy of intangibles. And intangibles are about, creativity, skills, people. You can see that also when you look at, the growth in patents, exponentially everywhere, particularly in some regions of the world. This is ideas that are going to shape our world tomorrow, our economies tomorrow. We're depending more and more on, innovation, on ideas. And again, innovation is driven by creativity. That's the economy of tomorrow. You can think about, the labor market. We know we're going to have fewer young people in OECD countries. That's very, very clear. Now, basically, population is going to be a drag on output. Not everywhere in the OECD, but in most OECD countries. So if you want to compensate for that, the only way is to improve labor productivity, becoming better in extracting value from the skills of people. And this is about creativity, becoming more agile, more versatile, and actually extracting value from the people. It's the only way how we can be able to keep our living standards in OECD countries. And then, the nature of our labor markets. You can see everywhere this growing trend towards polarization. Now, those with the right knowledge and skills, with the 3 Cs, they have never had the kind of life chances they have today. Despite the financial crisis, the pandemic hasn't really impacted on those who have those right skill sets. They're very, very successful, incredibly successful. Whereas those who struggle with the transition to this new world actually pay an increasing price for this. The most successful companies these days are not created by a big industry. They're created by a big idea. They often have their product before they get their money. That is the possibilities of the times in which we live. If you, are at that frontier of innovation, of creativity, and so on. But if you're at the back end of this, you have a hard time. And this is not about, robots stealing jobs. We do not know whether technology, is going to create more jobs or destroy more jobs. People debate that. But it's going to change everybody's job. The kind of routine skills are disappearing. And, you can see that, translating into economic polarization, into cultural polarization. In the past, it was quite comfortable for governments to deal with this. Now you just, use taxes, you take money away from the rich, give it to the poor, you sort of equalize things, and that, made things work. Tomorrow, this is not about just, being economically surviving. It's about cultural participation. It's about social participation. Creativity is your driver for all of that. So in a way, I think, and that is much, much harder to deal with than just, economic redistribution, which we sort of know what to do about. And last but not least, knowledge is always power. This is sort of one of the most intriguing, versions of the future. When you look at the number of pages in all wikis, the exponential growth in there. In the year 2000, literacy was simple. It was about, extracting knowledge from prefabricated sources. We had a few television anchors who we trusted. We had some newspaper editors who wrote the stories of the world up for us. And yes, they had their viewpoints, their perspective, but we know it, and we could actually triangulate through that really, really well. When you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia, and you could trust that answer you find to be true. And that's what you could teach to your students. Today, when you look up things on Google, you get 10,000 answers to your questions. And nobody's going to tell you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting knowledge. It's about constructing knowledge. Very, very different skill set. So, it's not about literacy has become less or more important in the time in which we live, but the nature of literacy skills has just fundamentally changed. And, when you look at our PISA data, we are teaching still 19th century literacy. We're not teaching the 21st century literacy where you have to navigate ambiguity, manage complexity, integrate different sources of information. Why do I say this? Because look at this chart. Here you can see basically the share of 15-year-olds who can, actively navigate digital information. And you can say, yeah, in Singapore, Korea, parts of China, and so on, you can see, a good half of 15-year-olds being able to do that. But in most of our countries, students, of course, can use technology. They can operate their mobile phone, but they do not have the skills to actively navigate information. And that is about, the creative use of information, imagining information in front of you that you do not see, building the bigger picture, seeing the forest among the trees. That's what we're talking about. So again, we teach students 19th century literacy. We teach them there's one truth, remember it well. We do not teach them to question the established wisdom of our times. That is this big mental shift that I think you need to promote much more vigorously if we want to see changes in those kinds of data. You can say, well, humans have always been better to invent new tools than to use them wisely. But, these days, it actually matters. You're basically on your own if you become, part of these echo chambers that just amplify your own opinions and insulate you from divergent information sources. That's the reality in which we find ourselves. Technology connects you with everyone, that's wonderful, but actually in reality, it narrows your perspective if you do not have those creative skills actually to push those kinds of boundaries. This data from 2018, if you think, well, it's all changed in the last years, we'll see. By the end of next year, we're going to have, up-to-date data on this. But over the last 20 years, we've basically seen almost no systematic change. There's been a handful of countries where you can say, actually, yeah, they've turned the needle. Countries like Estonia or Singapore, or parts of China, but Portugal, Poland. But, you don't find so many. In most of our countries, actually, these curves have remained pretty flat. So that's something that we got to work on. You think about, you can change that with money. Actually, the relationship between spending per student on the horizontal axis and those literacy outcomes is actually, quite modest. Yeah, on the left side, if you spend very little, you can gain a lot when you spend more. But actually, for most education systems, money isn't the problem to solve that we're talking about. Nor is time. I think that's actually even more interesting here. You can see that is because it's the first thing that people say. You want more creativity, give us more time, or you add more subjects. You can see actually there's huge differences in the volume of learning time across countries. You can see the time in school in blue here and the time out of school in yellow. And you can take a country like, the United Arab Emirates, where students spend close to 60 hours learning per week. Huge amount of volume of learning time. And then you contrast that with Finland, where it's only 37 hours. Huge differences in the volume of learning time. But when you look at productivity, you can see, students in Finland or Germany or Switzerland or Sweden or Estonia, they learn a lot in little time, whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and learn very little. So once again, this is not about time. This is about how we use student learning time, how we design learning environments that are more imaginative, that give young people more space. And if you want your young people to become more creative, you have to give them space to experiment. If they experiment, they need to take risks. If they take risks, they make mistakes. If our education systems are not becoming a lot better to help young people to learn from and with mistakes, we're not going to see a lot of more creativity in our learning environments. Why is this important? Well, this is actually an interesting analysis. We ask ourselves, if you want to get to the 100 most innovative jobs, Where do you come from? And you can see, engineering and computing coming out first. No surprise. Most of the innovation today is about technological innovation. But you look at the arts coming second. And that's something that we have, almost made an extracurricular subject. We call it sort of something that is out of the business of school. And actually, if you look at the future of our world, of our economies, now maybe that is one of the most, important pathways that we have. Is, by the way, also one of the best predictors that we have on creative skills in our new survey on social emotional skills. Intensity of participants in arts activities was one of our best predictor. And this brings me to one of the most discouraging findings here. I don't know why the bottom of the slide is missing. This is about 9 regions for which we actually looked at creativity among 15-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And now you will tell me, there we are. There you have the regions. And now you will tell me, well, I probably put the slide the wrong way up, basically. Because if I would tell you, your 15-year-olds are doing worse in mathematics than your 10-year-olds. No. You would say, oh, there must be something really wrong in schooling. And when you look at creative skills, that's what we see. And actually, we don't talk about it very much. We don't question it. We say, oh, well, that's about personality traits. As people grow older, they become more self-critical and, self-conscious, and yes, become less creative. That's all very normal. We don't ask ourselves that question. Creativity is not something that you have to create. We're all born with an abundance of creative skills. If you have a 3-year-old son or daughter, they're going to question everything you tell them. They're going to experiment with anything that gets into their way. They're always willing to learn, always willing to unlearn, always willing to relearn when the context changes. Now, that's what we are born with. But then, we put people into schooling and try to make them compatible with our ways of thinking. Now, that's basically what school is about. It's about compliance, about conformity. You have to become very, very good at understanding, what people expect from you. And then, produce those answers. Now, most of our assessments today are still built on the premise that you have to figure out the answer that someone projected into the question. We're trying to change this in PISA. That's actually one of the things we're working on, where we actually integrate the learning and assessment part. I would actually say maybe, one of the biggest mistakes that education made is to divorce learning from assessment. We ask students to pile up years and years and years and years of knowledge, and then we say to them one day, come back, tell me everything that you learn, and tell me this in a very contrived, constrained kind of setting. And that creates that kind of disconnect. The future is about, integrating learning and assessment. And by the way, the past was also about this. If you think back, long enough into the past, all of the learning was about apprenticeship. You learned always with real people. You got that real-time feedback. You worked on real problems. Today we talk about interdisciplinary learning and all of that. That was the natural way of learning. People learned on real problems. And when you did a mistake, it had real consequences. So you learn from the mistake. Today, when you do a mistake in school, at the end of the lesson, they put it in a bin because actually it has no meaning. And then this is what you see. And by the way, this is not just the student data. The parents told us the same story. Plus the teachers. So it's actually something that people are not surprised about. It's something that people are quite well aware of if you ask them. No, we rarely ask people about it. It was the first time that we have those data ourselves. But it's something I think that we can see that we really need to become aware of now. And some people still say, oh, these are soft skills. But, I think we have lots of reasons to believe that the soft skills of the 20th century are becoming the hard skills of the 21st century. And vice versa. Many of the things that you considered hard skills. I studied physics. And I was very successful at my first job, in a laboratory. If you put me in a laboratory today, I'm probably going to do a dismal job because that world has changed so rapidly. A lot of the kind of hard skills of those days where I studied have become very soft. Taken over by technologies or other means. I think that's the reality that we have to engage with. Now we have digital platforms that drive the reorganization of our economies. You no longer know what is a big and a large company. Before it was taken over by Facebook, WhatsApp had 55 employees, changing the world, changing the way we communicate. We no longer know who is the consumer in the business. No? This is about emerging peer-to-peer markets. Now that's basically the new companies. Now we have people taking more ownership over how they work, where they work, when they work. No? People criticize, 0-hour contract being unfair, but probably people want a different way of working. They want more discretion. Online labor is on the rise. Once again, that is about, you becoming more imaginative to create your own job than just waiting for a job. We can see everywhere jobs are becoming digitally intensive. It's about half of the job where this is making a huge difference. No? And these bars are growing, and they're growing everywhere in the world. And the technology in way, we can look at it in two ways. But the one thing that is very clear, it takes away those routine tasks. If you have a job that you can explain to someone in a formula, a computer is going to do that better, faster, and in more effective ways. No? We have a rise in technology-intensive tasks, and you just put the two things together, and you know about the future of work. And that, you look at this diagram, and you can see how creativity really becomes almost everything. Can you deal with non-routine tasks? Can you integrate technology-intensive tasks? Can you think across the boundaries of subject matter disciplines? And this is not about, meshing up everything in instruction in school. It's about enabling students, to take that disciplinary perspective, but to also take another perspective and look at the problem from two sides. Can you think about a problem like an historian? Can you think about a problem like a mathematician, like a philosopher? The more perspectives you can integrate, the more you will be able to connect the dots where the next innovation is going to come from. And this is, what creativity really, really is about. The good side of it is always, digitally intensive industries are always, portrayed as, what's killing jobs. But actually, when you look at the data, you can see digital intensive industries make you use your skills much more productively. And this is not just about technological skills on the left side, but almost any skill for which we have data is used more productively in a digitally intensive environment. And in practice, it means you're going to earn more money out of this. You use your skills better in technology-intensive jobs. We also see, and I find that really interesting, in a technology-intensive job, you are more likely to learn from coworkers. You are more likely to learn by doing. You're more likely to invest in yourself to keep up to date. Now, the digital world is also the world of learning, where you continually upgrade your knowledge and skills. And once again, that requires that drive, that growth mindset that is, the other side of the creativity equation. Technology, is going to make a big difference to this. We have, new learning experiences. When you look at augmented reality, virtual reality, why would you listen to a teacher explaining you the result of an experiment if you can do that experiment in a virtual laboratory? All of that is becoming quite real. We can integrate, real information with real problems and get students a much more experiential way of learning. Learning analytics help us better understand how different students learn differently. Now, while you study mathematics on a computer, the computer can figure out, how you learn and how you study, and then, make your learning experience more personal, more real, more kind of adapted to your learning growth, and so on. So again, I think this is where creative thinking can become, a tool, not just, of what we learn, but also how we learn. And then, of course, I mentioned already, the integration of, learning and examination is going to be the future. And that will hopefully do away with this kind of compliance-based projective kind of learning that we still see dominating today. These are just a few thoughts, on this broader context, why we need to take this world really, really serious. And the kind of work that you are doing should not just be, a kind of small niche of experimentation. This needs to become the mainstream version of our education systems. And if not, we're going to lose a lot of young people. No? The biggest threat to education is not its incredible inefficiencies. We talk a lot about this in the OECD. We spend a lot of money and we get not much better outcomes. The biggest threat to education is its loss of relevance. No? The fact that young people will turn to other solutions and other ways of learning if we don't, provide them with the environment that will prepare them for their future, not our past. Thank you.
Andreas, thank you so much.